Assalamu alaikum. This is the third and the last lecture of the first week that we are meeting online, and I hope that all of you are fine, safe, and under the blessings of Allah. I wish you all the best, and the only thing I can say that don't be just worried. Keep your hope up. Inshallah, these trying times will get over very soon. Today we are talking about the first military regime, 1958 to 1969, the martial law era of Ayub Khan, and also as President Ayub Khan he brought in a civil government. Interestingly, surprisingly, Ayub Khan's military regime was welcomed and it was known as a benevolent despotism. But unfortunately, it ended as a discredited polity. When Ayub Khan came to power, he really used a strong hand against the corrupt civil servants, black marketeers, notorious smugglers, and this gained him the gratitude of the common man. The civic rule somehow came back. The markets were accessible. The common man felt comfortable and satisfied. Unfortunately, this situation in West Pakistan could not be replicated in East Pakistan, and where it remained almost a failure, as the General Officer Commander Major General Umrao Khan admitted later. Instead of general elections, which is almost customary with the dictators to turn themselves into civilian rulers, he introduced a new system which he called basic democracy. So it was not a parliamentary system, it was a presidential system, and the president has to be elected by an electoral college. And because a very limited scope of electorate was open, so culturally it was a different story. The coercion and corruption somehow curtailed by its nature. And the other thing was that the martial law punishments were very harsh, some were unwarranted, and as the presence of military was not resented, reprisals were not vicious. So one can think that the common man has the sense that if his life and the promise for his life is safe, then they are ready to live a life of some kind of security and safety even under a military rule. In 1962, President Ayub lifted martial law and promulgated Pakistan's second constitution, and this, as I said earlier, this introduced a presidential system in Pakistan. Let's be a little kinder to this military ruler, because he brought many reforms which brought a wonderful feeling of change among the people. He brought the reforms in law and in education. He was the one who touched the family laws, brought some rights of women to fore, and made it possible for women to raise their voice for their rights. Education, he was very much interested, and if one can say that he made the bachelor's for 3 years, so, and somehow a very early kind of pattern of liberal arts education was introduced by him in Pakistan. Though at that point of time the socialist economic tendencies were prevalent in Asia, but Pakistan Industrial Corporation set up units in public sector and sold them to the private sector. Perhaps this was one way for the government to gain some economic strength. And this made industrial development at a much quicker pace, which was hampered during the last decade or so because of political instability. It was Dr. Mahbubul Haq, the chief economist of Planning Commission, who revealed that the wealth of whole of Pakistan was in the hands of 22 families, and I think it gave Ayub Khan an idea how to approach all the question of economic benevolence or economic affluence, both. He made it possible that all the capital goods should be imported free. He made trade into another kind of a promise known as bonus vouchers. It was known a bonus voucher scheme, which could be purchased in the open market, and it was launched, and this would subsidize imports. But in spite of the boom of the 60s, the import of some articles, especially books, was severely curtailed. Some very important changes were made in agriculture. The pace of change was slow in industrial sector. Ayub Khan named it Green Revolution, and it really brought a modernistic idea of agriculture to Pakistan by chemical fertilizers, mechanized farming, and sinking of tube well that today are the spine of our irrigation. Mechanical farming gave a speed, and benefit of it did not go to the peasant as it should have. The benefit, most of it went to landlords. The question was that he took advantage of our opposition. The only politician of any consequence of merit was Hussain Shahid Sohrawardi, and he had died in 1963. Another rival was General Azam Khan, who spoke his mind bravely, but the weakness of the disparate combination of opposition was actually exposed when Madar-e-Millat Mohtarama Fatima Jinnah was brought by the combined opposition as presidential candidate. In spite of social disparities, stability had brought progress to Pakistan. The urge of democracy brought forth impressive rhetoric, but except the political change, and it only came in cities like Karachi, Dhaka, and Chittagong. Ayub Khan, among other scenario of Pakistan, he lost in Karachi, Dhaka, and Chittagong, but a majority votes he got, 64%. In my opinion, if 1965 war would not have come, the political stability have brought greater economic gains to Pakistan, because after Liaquat Ali Khan, it was the first time that a stable government was in its place. The 1965 war preceded by the run of Kutch conflict, an area where the borders had not been demarcated at the time of independence. And the Pakistan Army gave a good account of itself, but yielded to British advice to submit the dispute to arbitration. Sometimes cool-headedness works better than the arms. The 1965 war had its causes when India abrogated Article 370 of its constitution, which had given Jammu and Kashmir an autonomous status with a separate prime minister, and on December 4, 1964, enacted Article 356 and 357 to Indian Constitution, which in effect was an attempt to declare Kashmir was an integral part of India. So what Modi has recently done, the footprints and the blueprints were done already by 1964. Under these circumstances, where Kashmir became a greater issue, and it will then mean also that we had to surrender Azad Kashmir to India. If that came about, India could link up with Afghanistan from Kashmir and Khuda na khasta crush Pakistan. There was only one choice to attract attention to the plight of the Kashmir and cause international pressure on India to treat Kashmir as a settled issue and to allow them to think that Kashmir was not a settled issue, and it was an international pressure on India not to think that they can do to Kashmir whatever they wish to, as now they are doing. Under these circumstances, Pakistan had to break the deadlock by sending infiltrators to Kashmir, which was not a novel step. John F. Kennedy has done the same thing in Cuba, and the leaders of Britain and Sri Lanka, Indonesia, even in Brazil. The majority of the world said that India was the aggressor. The majority of the world says that India was aggressor and is aggressor, but nothing is done really to solve this very complicated situation as it has become over the years. Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, the foreign minister at that time, and foreign secretary Aziz Ahmad gave this advice to President Ayub that India would not show its anger or its dissatisfaction over Pakistan's stand, and it will not cross the international border. One wonders that Ayub, a military man, how could he rely upon the civilian assessment rather than the military assessment and intelligence into realistic value of all this conflict. And when the Indian Prime Minister Lal Bahadur Shastri had publicly proclaimed that India would retaliate at a place of her own choosing, this was again a threat, and a very alarming threat. The only thing that we can think about the Pakistani initiative, that it was prompted by the Chinese leadership and based on Chinese intervention. Chinese wanted to help Pakistan, and Zhou Enlai said to Ayub that a just settlement of Kashmir dispute required sacrifices. And on September 4, 1965, the Chinese foreign minister Chen Yi was told of Pakistan's sacrifices. One Pakistani information through an informant, Shamsuddin, told Keith James of the British High Commission that the suggestion that regular troops be disguised as Kashmir freedom fighters was a Chinese one. The Chinese role for giving Pakistan some space against these Indian military intrigues, China declared that India's invasion of Pakistan in 1965 was an act of naked aggression. It is obvious that the first Chinese ultimatum was to give Pakistan time to decide of its course of action, but Pakistan failed to take into account what China has provided to them, and they rather followed steadfastly not to succumb to pressure. US, while they calculated that Pakistani ammunition, which the US had supplied, would run out before Indian ammunition did, the US also reckoned that if Pakistan won a major battle in the Punjab, it could win the war. Another power to play a major role was the USSR. Its role could be best understood in the context of Tashkent peace talks of January 1966, which were called by the USSR. The Tashkent declaration was basically where USSR could only pressurize Pakistan, and over India also was to return to the Kargil areas, and it is at this point that Ayub was forthright. Otherwise, India was not that much pressurized as Pakistan was pressurized. So this Tashkent Declaration was signed in January 1966, and the only mention of the cause of conflict was as quoted. It was against this background that Jammu and Kashmir was discussed, and each of the sides set forth its respective position. The enchantment with Ayub was the prominence given by the government-controlled press to his son, Captain Gohar Ayub. This bred the suspicion that he was being groomed for succession. In 1967, Ayub published his political autobiography, Friends Not Masters, which took away the mystic of his reforms and caused the decade of development, which could have justly been celebrated, to become an occasion for derision. He resigned under all gherao, jalao, besiege and burn tactics. He resigned in 1969, March 69, when an anti-government demonstration became anti-state demonstrations. People started calling for regime change and calling for secession. So Ayub's removal became inevitable. I pray that you continue to take care of yourself cautiously, and there is nothing to worry about this course or its grades, assignments or exams. It will be architected that serves your interest better, and it lessens your anxieties. Khuda Hafiz. I'll see you next week.